Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki. I am the events manager here at Nuspire, and I'll be your host for today's live webinar session. So today's webinar is one of our most attended topics each quarter as we look at Nuspire's threat findings from last quarter and share our analysis on the current trends in cybercrime. Today, we'll be taking a look at the newest data from Q2 of this year. And we also have the full threat landscape report that went live this morning is now available on our website. I'm going to go ahead and share the link in the chat for that in case anyone would like to go ahead and grab that to look at later. If anyone has any questions during the presentation, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A tab, and we'll try to leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. And just so you know, we will send out an email tomorrow with a link to watch the recording of the session. So at this time, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Justin Hurd and Josh Smith. Justin is our Director of Security Operations and works to develop and deliver intelligence at Nuspire. He has over 13 years of experience in cybersecurity and has developed methodologies and tools for industry-based threat modeling. Justin previously worked 6 years for a defense contractor as a security engineer and network administrator. Josh is our principal threat intelligence analyst. He works closely in organizational threat landscapes, curating threat intelligence, and authoring Nuspire's quarterly threat landscape report. Josh holds a master's degree in cybersecurity technology. Previously, he served with the U.S. Navy as an operations specialist with 14 years of service, and he's been quoted in all sorts of publications such as Forbes, CSO Online, Channel Futures, Dark Reading, and others. I'll go ahead and kick it over to Josh to kick things off.
Thank you, Gina. Appreciate the warm introduction. First thing we'd like to cover today is it's basically our agenda. What are we going to go through? So for starters, we're going to cover our methodology and overview. How do we collect this data? How did we come up with this report? And then how did we come together to do this webinar today? We'll have 3 specific sections that we're going to be covering. That's going to be our ransomware section, our dark web section, and then exploit section. At the end of each one of those, we'll cover some different proactive detection and mitigation measures. And then at the very end of it, we'll wrap it up with a bow, with kind of a conclusion and review of everything that we've discussed, and then open up the floor for a Q&A. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Justin.
Thank you, Josh. Glad to be here, everyone. As Josh said, to kick it off, we're going to talk a little bit about how we collect the data and what the data that we're going to see here today is. So basically, we go through the process of gathering, processing, using that information to detect, evaluate, and disseminate. Today, we are disseminating that data. It's a collection of all the data that we have on our systems, as well as any externally collected data that we can get. That includes dark web information, trends that we're seeing as far as news go, and things that we're seeing in our SIM and other platforms that we have here at Nuspire. So it's a collection of all that to come up with a consensus on where we think things are going and where we've seen increases in certain areas of cybersecurity. So I will turn it back over to Josh to get into the meat of the report here.
All right, and so for our first section here, ransomware, one big thing to take away is we saw 1,400, a little over that, of ransomware publications for Q2. It's about a 10% decrease in what we saw for Q1. And if you're not familiar with what that means, ransomware extortion publications, basically what we're saying there is the ransomware actors have launched a successful attack against an organization. They have taken data out of it, and they've published that extortion on their ransomware site. We see this common as a model that is used. One of the groups we'll talk about here shortly. It's called ransomware as a service. And basically, like I said, they take that data out, publish it on their site to highest bidder if the victim organization doesn't pay a ransom. So starting off, taking a look at our top 5 ransomware organizations from Q2. Lockbit continued to dominate, even though they did face increasing law enforcement pressure. Play Ransomware, we did see an increase in activity as them as well, a little over 5% with activity with them, bringing them to be our second most active group. And also we did see an increase in activity from Black Bastard Ransomware, moving up into 3rd position. So Lockbit specifically here, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, Lockbit is one of those ransomware organizations that operates as a ransomware as a service. That basically means they allow any threat actor out there that they vet and deem worthy or credible enough to work with them to use their ransomware in an attack. So Lockbit then collects a portion of that ransom payment, and that's how they keep their operational lights on, if you will. In the beginning of May, though, the FBI, the UK, Europol, they named a 31-year-old Russian national by name and put a pretty sizable bounty on him as Lockbit's main administrator. Shortly after that, we have this huge uptick in publications that came from Lockbit. There's no official evidence per se of why that happened. My gut says what happened here is they felt that law enforcement pressure, and they likely went ahead and published everything that they either kind of had on the back burner of their stove, or organizations they may have had a foothold already in, but were still attempting to laterally move and grab more of that organization. They kind of are worried the gig might be up, so they went ahead and executed and published what they could. As we follow that trend afterwards, we can see their activity has constantly decreased through the rest of the quarter, to where the last 2 weeks within June there, they didn't publish anything. I'll give you a little sneak peek into what I've already looked at for Q3 because I was curious. They have published a little bit of stuff into Q3, but it is very minimal compared to what the usual activity was. So we'll keep an eye on Lockbit. We'll see if this the naming of that lead administrator is finally the death blow for this organization, or what happens from here. So behind them is Play Ransomware, which is the second largest one. We can see their activity has been trending up. They've been applying a lot more ransomware publications since really about that time that Lockbit started to fall back. They also employ a double extortion method, which means, again, they get into the network, they apply ransomware, they steal data out, so they affect the access and availability of the machines locally to the victim, and then also say, hey, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to sell your data to the highest bidder. Typically, what we do see with this group, though, is they gain access through things like valid accounts. So what they're looking at is working with initial access brokers, which we'll talk a little bit more in when we get to the dark web section of things. But they also like to use public-facing applications and exploit them. They're really big on VPN vulnerabilities. So if you have, any kind of VPN technology within your company, which most organizations do these days, that's definitely an area of focus for you when you see those critical patches come out. Anything that's affecting your VPNs and your technology vendor releases a notification saying, hey, there's a high or critical patch for that, you really need to be prioritizing that. Additionally, with that, they've also done a lot of focus on different Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, proxy shell and proxy not shell, things like that. And they've also taken advantage of a lot of exposed remote desktop protocols. If you have any kind of RDP instance that exposed to the internet, it's generally not a good practice to begin with, but this organization's looking for those specifically to take advantage of those. I would like to say, too, in the actual report, there's an entire list of the common tactics, techniques, and procedures that Play Ransomware uses. And it's a good place to go reference to see, do you have mitigations and ways to detect all those different TTPs? Another thing we like to take a look at as we review all this ransomware data is how are specific industry verticals affected by those ransomware organization gangs. In Q1, manufacturing was the top one. That remains the same for Q2. And it remains one of those prime targets for cybersecurity criminals due to their essential role in supply chains. Manufacturing organizations really can't afford to have those operational disruptions. The financial losses are huge for them in this sector specifically. There's a lot of challenges within manufacturing too, between the integration of IT and operational technologies and increasing digitization as well between really every industry out there. As we just keep growing our technological footprint, that adds more and more attack vectors every single time something like that is added. There is a notable manufacturing ransomware event already in 2024. There's a Japanese optics firm that suffered a serious attack that shut them down for days. The attackers demanded $10 million in ransom, And really with that historical lack of cybersecurity prioritization in manufacturing, makes them a very big target. Additionally, too, with manufacturing, you have a lot of intellectual property, and ransomware operators know that's lucrative. They themselves may not care about that intellectual property, but they know they'll have buyers out there on the market for it. So all of that exfiltrated data can become very valuable in a second wave for them too on top of ransom. I turn it back over to Justin.
Yeah, Josh did a really good job at kind of demonstrating that, all the different industries and who is likely to be attacked by these different ransomwares. So, that's kind of the first part of a lot of these things, just knowing who your enemies are, knowing who's going to be coming after you and what tools, malware, techniques, so on and so forth that they're going to use to do that. Some things we can do from a technical aspect to really help us either mitigate or respond to ransomware in general. First and foremost is going to be EDR or endpoint detection and response software. It's close to the endpoint, where a lot of the information is that we have or that we need in order to stop ransomware. But also they have some rollback techniques and some other mitigating factors built into the EDR that can help you against ransomware in general. More towards the recovery aspect, data backup and recovery plans, extremely important. A lot of times there's no way backwards. And that's kind of where they get you with the extortion schemes, where they know that you have no other choice to get your business back up and running, but to pay the ransom. And so that, having some secure backups that are offsite, hot swappable backups, cold storage backups, just having a way to restore should something like ransomware happen. The last one here is cybersecurity awareness. Josh touched a lot on the technical things that we can do, or some of the technical techniques that threat actors use, such as exploits that they're using in order to get into the system, using RDP to remote over. The people aspect is another big part of that. There's also phishing campaigns that can lead to ransomware, where you need to be good at identifying different phishing emails that may be out there. But just kind of knowing when to ask questions is also important. Something may be strange on the network, and just kind of having that path forward for end users to be like, oh, who can I reach out to in order to get some more information, or just get a better, more warm and fuzzies about clicking this link or visiting this site or downloading this extension, so on and so forth. So that becomes really important as well. Send it back over to Josh here for dark web.
All right, as we break into the dark web section here, we saw a 12% decrease in marketplace listings compared to Q1. One of the biggest reasons we saw this decline is specifically related to stolen browser data listings. We'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide here too. Although we did see increases for things like account access being sold, shell accesses, and lists of social security numbers. So as we talk about the top 5 info stealers, so for starters, what is an info stealer? It's a piece of malware that's specifically developed to scour a victim device for sensitive information. This may be things like credit card information, stolen browser data, which when someone saves their username and password inside of like Google Chrome or Firefox, they tell it to remember that, they can scrape that information out of there to go ahead and break into those passwords. So it's a very beginning stage attack sort of thing. And as we talked about with the ransomware about information brokers, a lot of these initial access brokers will use these info stealers to collect that information. And they may determine that they don't want to move forward with a ransomware attack. A lot of times because that's what gets in the headlines. Not a lot of people are hearing about info stealer infections, in the news every day. So it keeps most of the law enforcement pressure not diverted towards them, and they can still make decent money compared to like a ransomware ransom or something like that. So with that being said, Luma Stealer was in Q1, and really for a few quarters prior to that, has been the most popular information stealer. we saw a pretty sharp decline during Q2 of that being used as a malware on these dark web marketplace listings by about 25%. What we did see is Rise Pro as a stealer slide right up barely in front of that for the #1 spot. It wasn't due to an increase in activity. They were actually down by about 8% as well, but they maintained kind of the status quo throughout the quarter. And in doing so, that gave them that new slot. And in fact, you can see here just really kind of the decrease in Rise Pro activity. Rise Pro, though, is an information stealer that appeared initially in 2023. It primarily targets Windows systems, and it gets distributed through things like phishing attacks, which is, Justin just talked about there, about user awareness needed for that. It's also used in a lot of pirated software, and sometimes those fake driver and update downloads that may be advertised maliciously through ad campaigns and things like that. It focuses on harvesting things like credit card information, usernames, passwords, and it exfiltrates all that data back to its controllers. Once they're able to get a hold of that information, as I was mentioning before, they typically bundle that up. They make a listing on a dark web market forum and sell it to the highest bidder. Turn it back over to Justin.
That brings us into some things we can do to try to combat some of these things. Again, educate and train users on social engineering attacks. A lot of these things are actually installed via extensions. So maybe someone gets an extension, kind of a Trojan horse attack where they think it's something good, and it may be, but it's also has a keylogger or some type of browser information stealer. So again, that user education and just knowing what to look for and knowing to be cautious around some of these things, because the impact can be quite substantial, all the way down to ransomware and just business stopping. We talk about having a more layered approach to cybersecurity. Everything about cybersecurity isn't always technical. There's a lot of information that can glean just from things like this report that we're doing, just understanding what's out there. That way you can better solve for the different things that could be attacking you by applying the right processes, procedures, but also the right technology. And it's kind of understanding the trends and where things are going and where to spend your resources at. Those are some quick things we can do for dark web mitigation. There's also some other things which we talk a little bit more about where it comes to monitoring for leaked credentials that can lead to other attacks. Kind of back to the user education. A lot of times users use the same password for different applications. And so those passwords can be used to get into corporate applications as well. And so making sure that we're using different passwords or some type of password manager to help be more cryptic in the different passphrases or passwords we're using for these different technologies is also important and helps mitigate some of these attacks. And the last thing, multi-factor authentication. You'll probably hear that a lot through this report. It is another way for us to just safeguard our different resources by adding something else that they have to use to authenticate to a particular application or environment, so on and so forth. With that being said, I will send it back over to Josh to talk about exploits.
All right, and as we jump into our exploit section, we did see a 21% increase in activity when compared against Q1. And that's almost 15 million events that we witnessed within the quarter here. One thing I do want to call out specifically, we do exclude brute forcing as far as looking at the exploit data, just because it's so wildly varied and so noisy. Peeling that back lets us take a better look at some of the actual CVEs and exploits that are happening underneath that. So out of our top 5 exploit attempts that we witnessed, again, excluding brute force attacks, which would dominate this chart if they were included, the big thing that we saw was an increase of web server password file access. That specifically is an OWASP type of exploit. We'll talk about that here in a moment. And then we did see that overtake what our Q1 number one was the Hikavision product CVE. What that is really it's a vulnerability that's targeting a lot of the different security cameras they make and trying to use those and targeting of the Internet of Things products that they make. And then additionally, we did see still tons of Log4j. That's almost a 3-year-old vulnerability at this point, and it's still being very highly targeted and scanned for. And so as we move into that web server password file access, what that basically means is threat actors are out there scanning, looking for misconfigured or vulnerable servers, trying to gain access to sensitive files that are behind it. The different types of files that they're looking for specifically include different things that include the list of local users, different password hashes, and the host files for those servers as well too. And as I mentioned, this is mentioned underneath OWASP's top 10. So this is definitely something that's already been elevated. You can reference OWASP's top 10 to see all of the ones that they have listed within there. And it's a really good place to go if you're looking at web application security. If they were successful with this, they'd be able to enumerate different systems. They could crack the password hashes, and they also gain critical network infrastructure information, such as IP addresses, host names, how the internal network is structured, and that can really give them a leg up when it comes to lateral movement and trying to get around within the network. So it's really important to ensure that access to these types of sensitive files are restricted, and that proper file permissions are configured, and to implement just different access controls, firewalls, things like that, to prevent access to these things to begin with. And another section that we've added since the beginning of the year, and we like to keep circling back to, is the Patch Tuesdays that happen within the quarter. No secret that Microsoft is a dominant force in the global space here. It's hard to find an organization anywhere that doesn't have something within it. And so these become prime targets for threat actors. Threat actors are very opportunistic. They are always typically looking for the lowest hanging fruit, unless you're maybe a nation state actor who's looking for something very specific from a certain organization. The threats most organizations face on a day-to-day are going to be those threat actors that are scanning and searching for unpatched vulnerabilities and that low-hanging fruit, the biggest bang for their buck with the least amount of effort. Microsoft vulnerabilities unfortunately provide that for them. So it really does stress the importance of prioritizing these kinds of updates when they come out. Microsoft Patch Tuesday occurs on the second Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Administrators need to be discussing that within their organization, prepare for that patching and any downtime that might be associated with that. And really, I can't stress enough how important it is to get these patches implemented as soon as possible. We did see also within Q2 an uptick in some attempts to exploit some older Microsoft vulnerabilities. It's a big flavor of theirs, if you will, to use things that like our Microsoft Office products. It's easy to use for phishing for them. Users are familiar with the products, so it doesn't raise a red flag always to interact with a Word document or a PowerPoint. And there's some older vulnerabilities from 2017 and 2018 that abuse Microsoft's Office equation editor. That specific vulnerability allows remote code execution, which means if successful, the attacker can run commands at the level of permissions that that user has. So if they're able to get a hold of an administrative account, that really gives them a lot of power. They can install new software, they can delete data, they can add new users, and then log into that account to try to maintain persistence within a network. It really gives them a big foothold into the organization to begin to launch an attack. As Justin mentioned way before, phishing is extremely popular. It's still one of the most utilized vectors for initial stage attacks. And so things like these Word and Excel and PowerPoint files are still very dangerous if you don't know who they come from. So ultimately, making sure that your Windows devices are patched against those older vulnerabilities and these new ones as they come out, because these threat actors will adapt to these new vulnerabilities coming out and retool very quickly to take advantage of them.
All right, exploit mitigation or response. I think one of the main points Josh touched on was opportunistic. And when I think vulnerability and patch management and exploits, that's kind of the way I think about it when it comes to mitigating them. We talked about Log4j, which is a vulnerability that's been out for 3 years, which means that there's systems out there that haven't patched a vulnerability from 3 years ago. That was pretty prevalent. It was in the news. It affected a lot of people. So I think one of the first and foremost things that you can do, and it's not the first on this list, is monitor security news and vendor security bulletins. If you don't know that there's an exploit or there's a vulnerability out there for the systems that you have, how are you going to patch them? So I think that's kind of first and foremost is figure out who the vendors, the different security vendors that you're using or that your clients are using. And make sure that you're subscribed to those bulletins. There's all kinds of ways to kind of get all that data into one spot. Twitter's a great resource for just adding in those different Twitter users for the vendors. They put all that stuff out there. So having the information on what needs to be patched is first and foremost. Being speedy about patches. I mean, 3-year-old patches. Patch management isn't easy. I've done some network administrative work, and depending on the size of your environment, it can be very difficult. So we do understand that there has to be a little bit of grace there, but prioritizing which one of those vulnerabilities are going to cause you the most pain and patching those as soon as possible will definitely be a very good way for mitigating some of the most critical CVEs that are out there. Firewalls with IPS. So there are, most firewalls nowadays have IPS sensors on them, which will try to block different exploit attempts based off of the way that the traffic looks, which is, definitely part of that layered approach that will help mitigate different IPS events, especially from the edge. So outside things trying to come in. Disable those unused services. If you're not using particular ports and protocols, disable them. There's a lot of times we see firewalls with FTP traffic, but they don't use FTP, or they have remotes 3689 open. So people are coming into that. So there's different ways that we can do to mitigate those remote attacks. And then I think overall is just understanding the different exploits and vulnerabilities out there and patching as quickly as possible, as quickly as your organization will allow, to keep from the bigger things happening, like ransomware or malware installed or denial of service and things like that, lateral movement, all the bad things that we don't want to happen. This whole kind of ecosystem here is all, the best way to mitigate is that layered approach. And so this is just kind of that first layer to stop from initial access. And so just kind of bringing it all together with a lot of things that we talked about. I think, one of the most important things is to have a plan, incident response plans. No one, even if we do everything on this list, there's always a chance that you're still going to be hit by, a malware or a threat actor, or something's going to happen. And so having a plan of how to respond to that, we talked about backups, different backup solutions and making sure that you have that. I'm a huge fan of tabletop exercises. So, build that scenario of something happening and how you would respond to it. First and foremost, educate users often. That goes towards some of the phishing things, understanding how to identify those, understanding the risk in installing particular softwares and extensions and so on and so forth. Again, taking that layered approach, so having multiple layers from the edge all the way down to the endpoint, to where we can look at that data and try to stop the attack at different stages of the attack chain. Patching your tech stack, which kind of, on that, the edge is really important, but also internally, once, attackers have a foothold, they may need to do things like privilege escalation, where, the users they're on, doesn't have the right privileges to do what they want. So they can use some of those exploits to escalate their privileges and do more inside the network. making sure that all of our products, including malware protection, the EDRs, are all up to date. They're very good at keeping new signatures coming out as things become more prevalent. That ultimately just helps you. And then, segregating those higher risk devices. And so that's going into your organization, determining what your crown jewels are, the devices that pose the most risk, and just making sure that, we're using the principle of least privilege, meaning that we're only letting people access it that need to access it. If they don't need to access, cut off all ties, technically, process wise, so on and so forth.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to, Justin was talking about tabletop exercises, which large proponent of as well too. As you make your tabletop exercises or just talk through your IR plans and stuff, prepare for chaos. And so add that into your plan. Suddenly the phone system goes down. Now what do? The person that you've deemed the lead of the IR response is on vacation and unreachable. Add those different variables in there too, because that happens in the real world, as we see from different IRs that we participate in as well too. Practice those plans, train on them, so that way when the chaos of an event happens, if it does, you have people that are already prepared and know where to go, and also know how to adapt to the chaos that ensues in a moment like that.
Yep.
That's the only other one thing I wanted to add.
Yep.
All
Gina?
right. Yes, I have some resources to share, but I wanted to thank you both for sharing the highlights there from that newest report that came out today. We do have a few minutes left, for looks like about 15 minutes if we need it for questions. I do see a couple that came in while we were talking, so I will go back to those in just a minute. But if anyone else has any questions, go ahead and put them in there now and we'll get to those. But quickly, I'd like to mention our next webinar, which is going to be all about AI and cybersecurity. It's going to be a really interesting one with some of our executives who are going to come on and talk about how AI can enhance your security infrastructure and streamline operations. So I'm really excited about that one. It's going to be September 4th. But I will share the link in the chat for everybody here in case you'd like to go ahead and register for that one. And we hope to see you there. So I will also quickly share the link to the full threat report again, along with the press release that also came out alongside that today. And then just another link to our website that is our resources section. There is a ton of resources that you can get there. So let me put those in here for everyone as well. And then we will go into questions. We had a question come through a specific graph. I think it was slide 9, so bear with me. I want to go back to that and see if Josh can address your question here. So they were asking what the y-axis is on this graph. Josh, specifically with regards to the education here. It looks like 50 what?
Yeah, so basically what that data is yes, that's how many times a ransomware operator actually published something on their extortion site. So throughout Q2, there were 50 right along that line there for education. And so with that being said, basically what we're doing there is that's identifiable organizations within those publications. Sometimes when a ransomware organization publishes their extortions, they may not give much information on who the victim organization is. But if they do, sometimes they may give a name of the organization directly, or they may just give a specific industry that they're related to. And so that's a culmination of all of those mentions right there is what this graph is.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. All right, I'm going to go back to the end here while we read the next question. We have a question from Teresa. Where are folks getting their technology news?
I can start off, and then Justin, if I miss anything that you also do, free to piggyback on that. But Justin already mentioned Twitter, or X now, whichever you want to call it. But that's a wonderful resource for staying on top of absolute cutting edge breaking news. Because to be honest with you, a lot of the different publications I see later on news sites, they typically are sourcing a lot of that stuff from different security researchers or vendors themselves who are putting that information out. So if you have specific researchers that you know that you like, you can follow them, or even just as Justin talked about too, for notification of new patches and things coming out, your vendors follow their pages specifically. Outside of social media, I'm a big fan of Bleeping Computer. I follow that one a lot. Hacker News, getting a little bit more technical, but DFIR report when that comes out, love that and the breakdown of stuff they get into. Tons of indicators, actual command line stuff that they're running in a lot of the attacks that they've seen.
Yeah, I think exactly what Josh said. The only thing I would probably add to that is RSS feeds. There's RSS aggregators you can use. Feedly is one of them. There's some other free ones out there, and just subscribing to those RSS feeds of those vendors that you want the information from, or researchers, individual researchers, blog posts, so on and so forth, and just following that along. Really great ways to stay informed and just feed that into a Teams chat, or feed that into just a page that you go onto when you wake up in the morning. I know a lot of Intel analysts and researchers really like to wake up in the morning. There's one place that I go. What happened while I was sleeping that I may need to respond to. Kind of building that out for yourself is pretty important.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I see another question here. How can leadership of other departments work better with security teams to strengthen security preparedness?
I can take that one. That's super important because the security teams might not always understand what the crown jewels are on other teams, right? And so I think it's very important to create those stakeholder agreements between your security team. Hey, these are the things that are important to us. These are the things that we're scared about. How can we alleviate that from a security standpoint? And that will lead into things like tabletop exercises. You'll find during those exercises, a lot of times they're like, oh, well, I don't know what we would do in that case. Or, hey, we don't have monitoring on that at all, but you guys are telling me this is the most important thing for this department. Maybe we should spin up some technology. I think that communication with the security teams from another department is super important, and really allows the security team to deliver a good product to all the other teams within the organization.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Mark that one as answered. All right, we have a few more minutes here, and yes, the recording will be emailed out tomorrow. I'm getting some questions about that. Let's see here. All right, so let's talk about, someone's asking about Lockbit. If the Lockbit's activity remains impacted, what do you think will happen with ransomware threats? And I'll give that one to Josh.
All right. So Lockbit's been impacted. We can clearly see that from the graph earlier. So what's likely going to happen? We have a power vacuum. Ransomware is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's too lucrative. The risk versus reward for them is too far into the reward section still. Law enforcement's doing a much better job than historically that we've seen as far as applying pressure. But typically where we're seeing that is on those families that are making those big major headlines. And so some ransomware operators are now really taking the tactic of not doing that big game hunting. They'd rather stick around inside the small and medium businesses because they're not going to get that spotlight on them. So my prediction, or what I think will probably happen here, is if Lockbit is truly impacted and doesn't make a comeback, we're going to probably see Play Ransomware, Black Basta, one of those folks slide over to the left, and they're going to become the new top dog. That, or we've seen this with ransomware families before in the past too. Lockbit's going to suddenly close their doors, and what's going to happen is they're going to go in the background, they're going to change a little bit of code, change their infrastructure up, and they'll relaunch under a new name and just be back. And that's actually pretty common after some of these real large attacks and law enforcement pressure is to try to get everybody off the trail and rebrand and come back.
All right, thanks, Josh. Anything to add on that one, Justin?
No, I think I agree 100% with Josh.
So here's another question. Any thoughts on what CISOs might do in today's changed regulatory landscape if they are fearful of having the misperception of having a target painted on their back? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, ultimately you see a lot of the news and like where they're targeting, and so that can give the perception of like, hey, this is where all the things are happening at, and so the regulatory changes can happen in those different areas to kind as a kind of reaction to those things. But ultimately, we just obviously there's regulatory guidelines for for healthcare like HIPAA and so on and so forth. So they're pretty loosely defined. All we can really do is take that layered approach, making sure that we're doing our due diligence to have the right monitoring, the right logging, the right report data to be able to at least show what's going on and stop as much as possible. I think that's all we can do. Understanding the landscape is huge. Like the information we're gathering from this report would definitely help a CISO make the decision as to what technologies you need to invest in the most. What things are going to help us in these situations or help stop these situations like ransomware? Do we need better backup solutions? Do we need EDR? Do we not have it? So just understanding what that landscape looks like and understanding where your resources are going to get the biggest bang for your buck. It's also, it's one of the things that our threat intelligence team works on quite a bit. And the reason being is to help position us and our customers to have the right products, have the right things in place. Because there's a lot of products out there, a lot of security products, but which ones are most important to you and are going to help against the different threat actors that are targeting your industry, that have been proven to target that industry, for the time being, and that changes. But I think those are some things we can do to kind of prepare for any issues we might have with regulatory things coming out.
I think you just really hit something heavy there too, is about the use of threat intelligence per se, and how that risk then applies to you and your organization. The realistic risk of a threat actor group or ransomware organization targeting you versus somebody else, and that's where threat intelligence comes into play, because there are numerous advanced persistent threat groups out there that are all extremely dangerous and sophisticated, but they may not care at all about healthcare. They may be nation state backed and they're only looking for intellectual property within the manufacturing industry. So their tactics and techniques may not be applicable to your defense. And so that's where a big piece of threat intelligence comes into play to help your organization prioritize what matters to you, and then getting those different technologies and people that can help mitigate that.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are about 2 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and close it off. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to email us at webinars@nuspire.com. I'd be happy to get those questions shared to the right people here at Nuspire, or you can contact us on our website at nuspire.com. Also, upon exiting the webinar, there is a really short survey that will pop up, and we'd certainly appreciate any feedback that you all have for us on this today. If we didn't get to your questions, we will circle back if possible. But if any closing thoughts from either of you today, Josh or Justin?
Starting off with it, I'll say, first of all, thank you all for coming. Certainly appreciate you all being here. And hopefully we'll see you again next quarter. My biggest takeaways, again, I would say for everyone though, is know your technology stack, know actually what you have, get ready to apply those patches. And I'm going to real quickly try to answer Logan's question with that too, that strike a balance between the thorough testing and immediate patching. It is a delicate dance. Again, threat intelligence comes into play there to help you prioritize which vulnerability needs to be a stop shop thing, or versus we can put that back for a little bit. But yeah, like I said, so threat intelligence and patching is one of the biggest things that can probably help out.
Yeah, and I'd just like to replicate Josh's sentiment. I appreciate everybody being here. hope you got some useful information out of this that can help you going into the next quarter. And I'm excited to see everyone next quarter.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. And on behalf of Nuspire and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep.